This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening. Under pressure from Congress to say more, do more, to take stronger action on China, President Bush today did make a direct appeal to Chinese leaders to let up in their crackdown on pro-democracy demonstrators. He also stepped up somewhat U.S. diplomatic, not economic, but diplomatic sanctions against Beijing. Bill Plant reports.
Stepping up its public pressure on China, the Bush administration called on Beijing to suspend death sentences against student demonstrators and to pardon those arrested. Officials warned that the death penalty could only deepen the wounds of the past few weeks. On Capitol Hill, Secretary of State Baker signaled new sanctions against China.
The detention or arrest of these people for exercising their basic human rights, Senator, is clearly contrary to internationally recognized standards.
Baker told the senators he has recommended the U.S. suspend high-level diplomatic exchanges with China, as it already has military visits. A planned trip to China next month by Secretary of Commerce Mosbacher would be canceled. The U.S. also will try to postpone consideration of Chinese loan applications by the IMF and other institutions, totaling almost $1.5 billion. Baker argued that the administration is still carefully balancing its response.
I think the president was mindful of the need to preserve what is, to the extent that we can, preserve what is a very, very important relationship.
But many members of Congress think the U.S. response has been weak and far too low-key.
We took these minimal approaches. I think we looked awfully unprincipled. I think we looked like we cared more about commercial contacts and commercial relations than we cared about human rights.
A dozen members of the House went to the Chinese embassy to ask that the death sentences be reconsidered. After a meeting with the ambassador, they were not encouraged.
I must say that the reaction we got was not one that we had hoped for.
The ambassador's reaction, I think, was by and large indifferent to most of the sentiments that were held strongly and expressed strongly by this group.
Late today, the White House adopted Baker's suggestions, though administration officials remain skeptical that these new sanctions will do very much to affect the behavior of the current Chinese leadership. Bill Plant, CBS News, the State Department.
China's official press said more protesters were arrested today, and the Chinese Supreme Court told lower courts to swiftly and severely punish all, quote, counter-revolutionaries who have been charged. The order said nothing about giving them a fair trial. In China, that is not required. John Cheyenne begins our report from Beijing.
The images on Chinese television are brief. Human beings, often with bruised faces or arms, powerless, humiliated, and seemingly in pain. But the pictures of human beings without rights are also providing an insight into the system of repression that has not changed in 40 years.
China's human rights record has been abysmal for a long, long time, and the United States has paid no attention to it.
Some are sentenced to death. There is no suggestion of due process, no suggestion of a competent defense. And even if there were a defense attorney, the defense is not permitted to introduce evidence that contradicts the prosecution in a Chinese trial.
They're too fast, they're too quick. And there's a sense of blood here that should not be in a judicial system. There's a sense of revenge that should not be expressed in a judicial system.
In China, the means of execution is a single shot in the back of the head. The family of the condemned then receives a cruel joke from the state, a bill, 13 cents for the cost of the bullet. The most common sentence, however, is reform through labor.
Everyone looked at the Soviet system of labor camps and the network and protested about it. No one's examined the Chinese gulag at all, and it's vast. No one knows how many people are there, but it's enormous.
The injustices in China did not begin with the massacre of peaceful protesters at Tiananmen Square, or with the nationwide roundup of alleged bad elements aimed at discrediting the pro-democracy movement. The government's contempt for human rights has been there all along.
If we can establish some basic standards for human rights in the world today, then each country can be investigated individually to see whether they measure up to the international standards or not.
As we look at a young man bound to a tree, one final note on the judicial system. In a Chinese court, there is no presumption of innocence. Arrest itself is proof of guilt. John Cheyenne, CBS News, Beijing.
In this vast country, there is very little escape. One more student from that most wanted list was arrested today, a 28-year-old physics student from Beijing. That makes 6 now, 6 out of 21. Nationwide, the official tally of arrests is approaching 1,500 and rising. Today, courts were ordered to hire more people to deal swiftly and severely with the heavy workload.
The authorities are trying to close all exits to anyone who is involved in the so-called counter-revolutionary rebellion. Stricter controls have been clamped down on leaving the country. People who had passports and visas and who were ready to leave for the airport have been told, not so fast.
Instead, they have to line up at Beijing's Public Security Bureau for new exit permits. One more red stamp, but a tough one. Sources said only children and old people were successful. You could tell the changing times inside the American embassy. 3 Chinese citizens applied for visas today. That's compared to 350 yesterday. Outside the embassy, local police were turning people away. This man was told his passport wasn't enough. He came back with a letter of invitation from the United States, was told that wasn't enough either. Many women want to go to the States to visit their husbands who are studying there. This woman traveled 21 hours to get here to discover that the rules had changed.
I don't know whether I can get a visa or not, but I do want to try because we miss each other very much.
The work of foreign journalists continues to be difficult. A 3-man CBS crew taking pictures of Tiananmen Square with a hidden camera was discovered by troops early this morning and arrested. Accompanied into custody by an armed escort, they were interrogated. They confessed to violating martial law. They were held 2.5 hours and then released.
As we were leaving, one of the plainclothes guys who looked like probably secret police said, "So you're not going to do that again, right? Next time you do that, gonna shoot us."
There won't be a next time. CBS had that camera crew on the next plane out. Bob Simon, CBS News, Beijing.
Memories of the Titanic came back today when a Soviet ocean liner struck an iceberg off Greenland. This time, though, no one was killed or injured. Nearly 1,000 European vacationers on a summer cruise in the Arctic had to scramble into lifeboats or onto the ice, but they were all picked up by a Norwegian Coast Guard ship. Soviet crew members stayed aboard and managed to keep the 630-foot Maxim Gorky afloat, despite 2 big holes in the hull. At the Kremlin, Mikhail Gorbachev met today with Iran's parliament speaker, Hashemi Rafsanjani, and the Soviet leader said there has never been a better chance for improving ties between the 2 neighboring states. Rafsanjani is making his first foreign trip since Ayatollah Khomeini died earlier this month. He says the Ayatollah instructed him to seek better relations with Moscow. Still to come on the CBS Evening News, Juan Vasquez on Florida legislation to keep children from playing with guns. And David Dow on child care that skips a generation because of crack. Gerhard Gesell today postponed sentencing of Oliver North on his Iran-Contra conviction from this Friday to July 5th. He ordered a hearing on defense allegations that juror Tara King lied during jury selection by allegedly failing to reveal arrest records in her family and failing to reveal that she'd used drugs. Meantime, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee handed President Bush a victory. It recommended that former Bush aide Donald Gregg be confirmed as the new U.S. ambassador to South Korea. Gregg denies charges of any involvement in Oliver North's Contra resupply effort as National Security Advisor to then Vice President Bush. The influence peddling scandal at Housing and Urban Development is touching more figures in the Republican establishment. A House committee heard today from a top campaign strategist for George Bush as it studied the role of a consultant closely linked to the Reagan years. Terrence Smith has the details.
I will stipulate for purposes of today that you could characterize this as influence peddling.
Thank you.
With that, Paul Manafort, the latest Republican insider implicated in the burgeoning HUD scandal, acknowledged that it was his political connections that helped win some $43 million from the housing agency to rehabilitate and subsidize a project he and others own in New Jersey.
For some individuals, obtaining these scarce rent subsidy funds was as easy as phoning in an order to Domino's for a pizza.
A lobbyist and floor manager for President Bush at the Republican convention, Manafort also admitted that he earned a $326,000 consulting fee, $1,000 per apartment, to shepherd the low-income project through the bureaucracy.
You're still talking about a an hourly consulting fee of over $1,000?
Frankly, sir, our fees, which are annualized, are double that, if not more so, for our clients on an average basis.
The mayor of the town where Manafort's Seabrook apartments are located said he was never consulted or even told about the project until it was already approved by HUD.
Until I started getting calls from several major newspapers, I was unaware of Mr. Manafort. I'd never heard of him before.
Committee members who have been listening to tales of favoritism at HUD for days were outraged.
The bottom line, Mr. Manafort, is even if the project was meritorious, the selection of your firm leaves a stench in one's nose.
Nor is Manafort alone. Another of the well-connected Republicans who benefited from HUD programs is Robert Weinberger, a consultant who is the nephew of former Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger. When he interceded, HUD reversed itself and approved $5 million in assistance for this Minnesota housing project.
I believe that I needed the assistance of a lobbyist to help me understand the bureaucracy and the way that things worked in Washington and at HUD.
Weinberger, who earned a $15,000 fee, insisted that the project succeeded on its own merits.
If you're implying by my name being related to Cap Weinberger, I don't think it made any difference in this case.
Perhaps not, but for many rehabilitation projects seeking HUD money, the key to success was a consultant with connections. Terrence Smith, CBS News, Washington.
A jury in Atlanta today convicted former Georgia Republican Congressman Pat Swindle of 9 counts of perjury. Swindle was found guilty of lying to a federal grand jury about his knowledge of a drug money laundering scheme. He says he'll appeal. Swindle faces up to 5 years in prison and a fine on each count. He was defeated for re-election last November. Legislation in response to the accidental shooting deaths of 3 children this month and the wounding of 4 others. Juan Vasquez has our report.
The issue of guns and children is so powerful in Florida today that a law to do something about it sailed through a special session of the legislature in just 2 days.
70 yeas, 42 nays, Mr. Speaker.
And so the bill passes. The new law makes it a crime to leave a loaded firearm without a gun lock within reach of a minor, and a felony punishable by up to 5 years in prison and $5,000 if the weapon is used to inflict a serious injury.
But the main thing that we can't lose sight of is that the law will prevent deaths. And I think that's what the goal is, to prevent deaths, that we don't have a parent grieving.
In this parade of names that I have here, all these kids that are dead, pages and pages here in Florida.
In fact, there were more than 400 incidents of children killed or wounded by guns in Florida last year. The National Rifle Association lobbied successfully to exclude unloaded weapons, even if there is ammunition nearby, but did not oppose the bill.
Now, those who would suggest that a prison sentence for a grieving parent is a deterrent to these tragedies simply aren't thinking.
But gun control advocates would like to see other states adopt a law similar to the one in Florida.
But the fact is that while there are 60 million handguns in this country, almost half of them are kept loaded according to surveys.
Damn, if you're a parent, if you're going to go to work and you're going to leave your kids at home, you got to have enough common sense to lock up your gun, or else you shouldn't own one in the first place.
Owen is the stepfather of 10-year-old Scott Feltner, shot to death accidentally by a friend with a loaded gun. Meanwhile, 4-year-old Evie Sue Hagan of Orlando is recovering from a gunshot wound inflicted when her 6-year-old brother dropped the family's loaded gun. 2 weeks ago, that was an accident. In the future, it could be a crime. Juan Vasquez, CBS News, Tallahassee.
Investigation into alleged gambling by Cincinnati manager Pete Rose seemed like a game dragged out by rain delays, balks, and pitching changes. But Pete Rose talked today, and suddenly it looked like the final innings may be at hand. Frank Courier reports.
With his reputation at stake, Pete Rose came out swinging today in a war of words.
I'm happy to look into the camera now and say I never bet on baseball, and I never bet on Cincinnati Red baseball.
In my mind, he was taking a hell of a chance to jeopardize his career by calling up and betting with an illegal bookie on his own team.
And the battle moved today to an Ohio county court, where a judge set Thursday to decide if the court should intervene in baseball's probe of Pete Rose in gambling. Rose lawyers filed suit, charging Commissioner Bart Giamatti is prejudiced and should be barred from deciding Rose's fate.
I will probably continue to wish to have my hearing on the merits, and I will get that chance. So that's all I care about.
The judge will review the controversial 225-page investigative report on Rose, which includes transcripts of sworn testimony from former bookmaker Ron Peters. Testimony Rose's lawyers say was given in return for a lighter sentence on a drug conviction. Peters told Major League Baseball Rose had a standing $2,000 bet on the Reds to win, that he wagered almost exclusively on National League teams, and that Rose took heavy gambling losses on football and basketball games. Peters told CBS News he thinks Rose bet on baseball to recoup those losses, though ironically his bets on the Reds cost him. Do you think he won more money than he lost betting on the Reds?
On the Reds, no. If you bet on any team every day to win, you're going to lose because of the odds.
Why would someone who knows baseball and knows gambling bet day after day on his own team, but where he's guaranteed to lose?
Sickness. That's all there is to it. He's just a sick gambler.
While most of Rose's bets, Peters says, were placed through middlemen, on 4 to 6 occasions, Rose phoned personally. Once, Peters thinks, from in or near the ballpark.
It was shortly before the game, 15 minutes maybe. I get a phone call, said it was Pete. And Pete proceeds to make approximately 4 or 5 baseball bets, one of them being the Reds. And then I turned on my TV set to watch the game, and there's Pete hanging out of the dugout.
With Pete Rose insisting he never bet on baseball and his lawyers battling to take the controversy from the commissioner to the courtroom, the stakes are high for both sides in deciding who decides the fate of a legend. Frank Courier, CBS News, Cincinnati.
Do you like Raisin Bran?
Yes, I do.
Well, this is new Total Raisin Bran.
Oh.
It tastes just as good as your Raisin Bran.
Really?
But it has 4 times the vitamin nutrition.
4 times?
So can you think of one single reason why Total Raisin Bran shouldn't be your Raisin Bran? Just one. Waiting.
A recent test compared the Toyota Tercel stick shift, the Hyundai Excel stick shift, and the Subaru Justy Automatic. But we made it just a little tougher on the Justy, because you don't have to shift the Justy, and its incredible ECVT automatic makes it accelerate and pass quicker than the Hyundai and the Toyota. Proof that Subaru can beat the competition with one arm and one leg tied behind its back.
Where does it hurt?
Here.
For heartburn and gas, your medical answer is Extra Strength Malox Plus. Its doctor-recommended formula neutralizes more than any leading antacid. Ask your doctor about Extra Strength Malox Plus.
This business may seem easy, but try doing this with minor arthritis pain. For years I took aspirin, but now there's Advil. It gives me hours of relief, yet it's gentler to my stomach than aspirin. Advil, advanced medicine for pain.
The role of the grandmother in a child's life is the stuff of legend, the wise and loving and reassuring figure who represents comfort even when parents fail. Now, the national nightmare of drug abuse, growing more desperate day by day, is forcing a new role on grandmothers. And what that means is the subject of the latest in our occasional series as David Dow reports on an American crisis, cocaine, the youngest victims and the oldest.
Now, this is the part you don't like, huh?
Tiny Shantae Robertson is among the most publicized victims of the cocaine epidemic. A baby born to a crack cocaine addict.
When I first brought her home, she had like the shakes.
But Shantae's grandmother is a victim as well. Unnoticed and often unsupported, Carol Osbury and thousands of other American grandparents have been pressed back into raising families, second families, the abandoned children of their own addicted offspring.
This is my grandbaby and my first, And it would just hurt me so bad to know that she was out there somewhere, that, you know, she couldn't get help.
You want to hold her? Okay, sit down with her then.
At 67, life should be getting easier for Precious Moore. Instead, she has become full-time surrogate mother to 4 troubled and demanding great-grandchildren, ages 10 months to 8 years. She's determined to keep them together and out of foster homes.
I thought about it several times, picking up the phone, calling the supervisor and said, come get all of them. I thought about that a lot of times. Then I'd sit down and I'd pray, and then I said, well, I'll just resume my duties and continue on.
No one knows exactly how many children are being raised by grandparents. Some estimate it may be at least 1 in 5 in the inner city neighborhoods where crack is most rampant. Tragic testimony to its peculiar destructive power.
There is this strange undermining, this hideous undermining of the maternal instinct by this drug.
Carol Osbury has seen the evidence firsthand in her own daughter.
I don't know her anymore. Like one day she can come here and she says, oh, I want to see my baby. And then the next day or two, she may come and says, you can have the baby. I don't want her.
Precious Moore has seen it too in her granddaughter.
She says stolen money. She'll take anything, even the bicycles that I bought for her son.
For 8-year-old Lionel, it wasn't the first lesson in crack and the maternal instinct.
My mother had dropped me off and never came and picked me up.
Well, I just hope that you guys...
Instead of thanks, grandparents may confront hostility from their addicted children and their own guilt feelings.
Many of the grandparents feel as if they may not have done such a hot job in raising their own children, and that they are now in this situation because they were not as good a parent as they would have liked to have been.
In San Francisco, healthcare workers have organized a support group to help grandparents cope with the new, sometimes explosive pressures in their lives.
Why does a 5-year-old kid have to worry about basic needs? I need somebody to help me. These hands are being used to take care of those poor children. Nobody else helps me with them.
In fact, many have quit jobs to care for their grandchildren. Public aid rarely compensates. A congressman who's held hearings on their plight considers them neglected heroines.
You know, they're slowly evolving to be the frontline troops in the care of drug-addicted children. And we've got to acknowledge that.
Starting all over again. See, but I don't mind. I really don't. Yes.
Every day, meanwhile, dozens more join Carol Osbury on the front lines. Mothers of last resort. Old troopers salvaging the new wreckage of another losing battle with crack. David Dow, CBS News, San Francisco.
And that's tonight's CBS Evening News. Dan Rather. See you tomorrow. Good night.
I'm Kathleen Sullivan. Tomorrow, Senator Sam Nunn on reopening the arms talks in Geneva. Also, Dan Aykroyd from Ghostbusters 2 tomorrow on CBS This Morning.
This is CBS.